May I request the speakers to please turn on the video? Sir, आप अगर अपना video on कर सकते हैं अभी? All right. Namaskar and a very warm welcome to everyone joined in today on our 33rd Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. This talk is being organized by the Central Zoo Authority, New Delhi, as part of the ongoing Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The Mahotsav is a 75-week-long celebration to commemorate 75 years of India's independence, which falls on the 15th of August 2022. The Central Zoo Authority is taking this celebration forward through a massive outreach campaign entitled Conservation to Coexistence, The People Connect. Under the helm of this campaign, we will be showcasing 75 conservation priority species and 75 zoos, highlighting one species and one zoo each week. We are currently in week 33 of the celebration, with the Indian peafowl as the species in focus and the mini zoo Pipli as the zoo in focus. So joined in today to speak to us on the species is Dr. Dhanshri Paranjpe. Dr. Dhanshri holds a doctorate degree in animal behavior and is associated with the Abba Saheb Garware College and the Rupa Rahul Bajaj Center for Environment and Art. She has over a decade of experience in the field of ecology and evolution. Her research focuses on how the environmental factors surrounding an animal shapes its behavior. And she's currently exploring interactions between humans and the Indian peafowls in different parts of India. Apart from this, she is also passionate about citizen science. She will speak to us today on the connect and interactions people have with the species in focus. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Arundhati, for a nice introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yes.
I will
Thank
just
you.
share your presentation for you.
Yes.
Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So I would like to start with thanking the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, as well as the Central Zoo Authority of India, for organizing this talk and giving me an opportunity to speak about one of the wonderful species that I love to study. Um, Today's species, of course, as she has announced, is Indian peafowl, which is also known as Pavo cristatus. That's the scientific name. Now, everyone knows about peafowl. Okay, everybody either has seen them around or at least heard about them from their childhood in different songs and different artwork. Um, so, can you please change the slide, please? Yeah. So, all of us have seen peacocks or beautiful peafowls in many different forms of art since many thousands of years in India. Okay, so we see them in pictures, we see them in sculptures, different motifs from right from the small hut in a remote village to big palaces which were carved out of beautiful stone structures. You will see peacocks everywhere. Peacocks also have religious significance and connections to different deities in Indian culture. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we all know that we associate peafowl with Lord Krishna, Saraswati, Lord Kartikeya. And so this is a species which is very familiar to us. Even if you ask a small child whether he or she knows about peacocks, they will definitely tell you, yeah, it has a beautiful train, it has beautiful tail, feathers, and it dances when it rains. So we kind of all know this. But do we really know a lot about it? It's also our national bird. So, what's more to know about it? That was the question when I started studying Indian peafowl. I just assumed that a lot must be known about this species. Um, but then what I realized is a few things. First, it is found all over India. Yes, it is definitely our national bird. When you go out looking for it, you can easily detect it. And interestingly, very interestingly, it shares space and resources with human in many parts of India. And probably this has been happening since thousands of years because it is so much culturally embedded into the Indian culture. Uh, However, when you think that it is staying so close to human beings and we have to share space and resources with this magnificent bird. So, what happens when we have to share space or resources with any wild animal? Next slide, please. Yeah, so what happens when we have to share space or material or food with wildlife? Either there is competition, uh, or there are a lot of conflicts, or the third consequence is one can share the resources or space peacefully with the species. Okay, and this is what has happened with Indian peafowl since many years in India. So the question that rose in my mind is that what are the factors, what are the influencing factors based on which we could peacefully share space with peafowl specifically? Because if we look at many other wild species, for example, elephants or tigers or leopards or wild boar, we often hear stories that these animals come and destroy crops, or there is a attack of tiger on somebody and somebody got killed. Sometimes there are huge crop losses because of wild boar or because of nilgai. So, in amidst many such stories, there doesn't seem to be any or not that many stories about peafowl. Okay, so we have managed to exist peacefully with peafowl, while such peaceful correlation doesn't exist with other animals. So the what I found interesting is why is it so? Next slide, please. And therefore, if we want to talk about the relationship between wild animals and human beings, today's topic, which was declared by this, rather, which is the declared topic of this whole series, is the conservation and coexistence. What is the connect with people? Okay, so here with next few slides, I'm trying to connect peafowl with people. What is the relation between peafowl and people, and with how can they coexist with each other? Next slide, please. Yeah. So I asked basically two questions. Do animals change the lives of human beings? Just being around humans, or do humans change the life of animals? So in any interaction there are two sides. There are animals, and of course human beings are also animals, but we want to consider these two sides. How do wild animals influence humans, and how do humans influence the lives of wild animals? So, to coming to the first part of these two questions, how do animals actually influence anything for human beings? To understand this, I conducted a lot of interviews of people from villages in Maharashtra and Rajasthan. I selected villages which had a huge population of peafowl. Okay, in Rajasthan, we all know that there are lots and lots of peafowl all around people in villages, sometimes even in cities. In Maharashtra, also there are certain pockets in which there are a lot of peafowls that come to the villages. They come to even houses, and so through these interviews, my intention was to understand how do people feel about this particular species? Are they friendly to the species? Do they feed them? What do animals do when they come close to human beings? Are they entering their farmlands? If they are entering their farmlands, what are they doing on the farmland? Are they coming and eating the crops? Or are they coming for water? Are they coming for shelter? Is there any impact on the agriculture and income of villages? So those are the questions that I tried to ask through group discussions as well as individual interviews throughout these villages across Maharashtra and Rajasthan. And I found a few very interesting things. Next slide, please. Okay, the first major thing that I realize is that peafowls do have some impact on agriculture as well as income of people when they live around human beings. Okay, peafowl come and eat crops. Now, what do they eat? They come in numbers to farmlands, and they seem very much to eat chilies, wheat, jawar, bajra, various cereals, and they don't just eat the ready grains or cereals, but they also eat sprouts, they eat leaves, they eat fruits, flowers of various crops. And this may lead to a crop loss as much as 50% in certain farms. Um, we also tried to estimate how much loss or what exactly is the stage of crop which they like most. So a lot of them come immediately when the crops are sown, when the little sprouts come out, and they love to eat those sprouts. So when the sprouts are eaten, the subsequent crop, a part of the crop never grows. So that's the first stage at which the farmers may incur losses. But they also come and eat the crops at the time of harvest. Okay, so when the crops are ready, especially when there are chilies or there are groundnuts, they actually dig out groundnuts and eat them. They love chickpeas. And so the farmers which take these particular crops can incur losses as much as 50%. Okay, not only there is loss of crops, but farmers have to guard their crops if they don't want to incur those losses. Sometimes the farmers are forced to change the place of the crop that they want to take, because if certain areas get lot of peacocks, lot of peafowl, then they have to take the crop somewhere else. Okay, so they sometimes have to change the location of the crop, or they have to change the crop altogether. So directly or indirectly, the farmers do incur losses, and this of course affects the way they choose their crops, or the how much they earn through their crops. Next slide, please. So here are just some pictures, the crops that I mentioned. You can see wheat, you can see chilies being eaten, you can see groundnut being dug out and the plant is lost. They eat leaves as well as many different parts of the plants. So they can be considered as major crop pest, at least in certain parts of India. Next slide, please. But this does not complete the story. It's not just they are the villains and they're destroying crops. There are also positive interactions between humans and peacocks. Of course, we all love to see peacocks. They are so beautiful. When they dance, we all want to see them. And so there is a tourism based on peafowl. Just like people want to go and watch tigers, or people would like to go to the zoos and watch animals, there are many places where people actually go to watch peacocks because there are lots of peacocks there. And so in particularly one of the village that is my field site, there is a tourism business based on peacocks. So there are these agri-tourism resorts where they will put lot of grains for peacocks to eat, and they put these grains very regularly. So they are sure that peacocks are going to come for eating those grains, and then the tourists are attracted and they come and stay at the resorts just to watch the peacocks around them. Okay, so there is an income through tourism in these villages. So in a way this is a positive effect or a positive interaction, one can say. Next slide please. Yeah. So the other part we want to see is, yes, peacocks are influencing, or peafowl are influencing humans around them. But how do humans influence peacocks? I just mentioned that in many places across India, not just in the village where I do my field studies, a lot of people provide grains. In Rajasthan, particularly in many parts, it's a tradition for many hundreds of years that when you visit a temple, people take a bunch of grains with them and offer them on a platform or some place outside the temple, so that the birds can come and eat the grains. So this is called as food provisioning, and this food provisioning can actually change behavior as well as diet of these peacocks. So in this graph I'm showing at the three different field sites that I was studying. You can see that in the first graph, called a field site called Morachi Chinsoli, almost 71% of the peacock's diet consisted of food that was provided by human beings. So instead of finding on its own its natural food, maybe insects, maybe worms, some other leaves, sprouts, whatever they find around, they were preferring to eat the grains offered to them by human beings. And that's a huge change. Compared to that, in Nashik, where there was very little food provisioning for them, and very infrequent provisioning, we saw that about 60% of the diet was natural diet versus just 40% of their diet consisted of grains that people gave them. Okay. In Rajasthan also, as I mentioned, many parts people offer grains to them. So in Rajasthan as well, about 60% or 61% of their diet consists of grains. Next slide, please. So the food that humans are providing not just changes their diet, but also changes how much time they spend in different behaviors. So at food provision site, which is the left side circle, the red part of the circle that you see, they seem to spend almost half of their waking hours, active hours, in feeding. So they are just feeding whatever is available, and they spend much less time in other behaviors. As compared to that, where food is not actively given to them, they have to walk and search for food, and so they spend a little more time in walking, actually a lot more time in walking and searching and other types of behaviors compared to the provision sites. Next slide please. Yeah, not only their food habits, but also the places they choose for dancing or displaying their beautiful feathers. That seems to be affected if you give them food very regularly. So, what you see in this slide is three circles that you see, and there are some dots. So, the dots are actual places at my field site where I found them dancing. And where were these concentrated? They were concentrated around the place where these peacocks were offered food very regularly. So they are also choosing to dance very close to the food site. Now, this is not necessarily bad or not necessarily good. We have to see how it affects their safety, how it affects their other behaviors, and I'm still in the process of studying that. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I just want to summarize that the grains which are given by humans, or the crops that they find around human habitation, these are very important and reliable sources of food for the peafowl. Not only that, by providing food, we are giving them a huge variety of very nutritious food. So imagine that you have been given a dish full of all, like you give big thali in weddings or in a big restaurant. If you are offered that regularly at a regular place, why would you go looking for food? And that is exactly what the peafowl are doing. They're getting very regular food at at a regular place, and it's very nutritious food. So that is how their diet, as a consequence of this, their various other behaviors are getting affected. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I want to just summarize saying that when humans and wild animals, and this can be true not just for peafowls, but it can be true for other animals also, which we keep feeding or offering food. So when humans and wild animals share space and resources, they can influence each other in many different ways. In terms of behavior, in terms of food habits, or their other preferences. Also, if we want to think about how, what we feel towards a species, do we respect those species, do we tolerate those species, are we ready to give them space and food and other material, appropriate habitat to them, that attitude or our thinking about wild animals matters a lot when we want to talk about conservation or peaceful coexistence. Next slide, please. So, what do we learn? Human interactions with wild animals and plants as well need to be studied carefully. If I had not gone and interviewed those villagers, and I had not gone and looked around how it is affecting the peafowl, I may not have found all these wonderful things. Humans can share space and resources with other animals peacefully. Next slide, please. So, what we need to change is the way we look at the world. Often we think that humans are the topmost species, the most intelligent ones, and in some ways we are. But instead of that, if we think about nature as interconnected species, then it would be much, much better for keeping alive all kinds of wonderful species around us. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I just want to end by saying thank you to a whole lot of people who helped me out through these studies. My funding agency, which is Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, as well as my host institute, Abba Saheb Garware College, who has let me study these wonderful creatures. And I want to thank all the volunteers, specifically two of them, Vedanti Mahimkar as well as Priyanka Dange, who have helped me throughout these studies for collection of data. There are other people who have participated in this study, a lot of students, a lot of citizen scientists. I want to end my talk by thanking all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing insights from your research on the human and the Indian peafowl interactions. We will take question answers for this session at the end. We now move on to the Know Your Zoo section. So, joined in today to speak to us on the zoo is Mr. Rajiv Garg. Mr. Rajiv is the Inspector Wildlife of the Mini Zoo Peepli. He has a background in sciences and is working with the Forest Department, Government of Haryana for close to a decade now. Apart from Pipli Zoo, Mr. Rajiv also holds the charge of the Kurukshetra district, wherein the Chilchila Wildlife Sanctuary, Thana Community Reserve, and the Crocodile Breeding Center, Babhorisar, fall within his management purview. He is passionate about animal welfare and is keen to improve their management standards in the district. He will speak to us today more on the zoo. So over to you, sir. सर मैं आपके लिए आपका प्रेजेंटेशन शेयर करती हूँ अभी. आप अपने आप को अनम्यूट कर दीजिए प्लीज. सर आप इसको देख पा रहे हैं प्रेजेंटेशन को?
Yes, ma'am.
ओके सर, प्लीज कंटिन्यू.
Yes. Slide, please, ma'am. Next.
जी स्टार्ट कर.
And yes, ma'am. Thank you. Pipli Zoo is small but beautifully designed. As conservation, education is the main objective of the zoos. Pipli Zoo was established as Deer Park in the year 1982. It is located on the right side on the national highway, that is GT Road, at 160 km from New Delhi in Kurukshetra district. 4 km from the Kurukshetra city on Delhi Chandigarh highway. Total area of the zoo is 27 acres. It was recognized as mini zoo by the Central Zoo Authority on 10th August 2005. All the enclosures as per CZ norms and master plan layout. Visitor facilities, lawn, toilet, interpretation center, drinking water coolers, CCTV cameras, wheelchair show. The main in the Pipli Zoo, the breeding of loin. On 7th June 2018, Loiness Sakshi gave birth to 5 cubs. And the 3 cubs, 2 female and 1 male, were hand-reared by the zoo staff, and these 3 cubs shifted to Rohtak Zoo. Further, Sakshi gave birth to 3 cubs on 17th May 21, and these 2 cubs are now healthy. Change the slide, please, ma'am. Slide change. Now, the objectives. Main objectives and the vision is to create the awareness about our rich fauna among general public and develop a healthy relationship between animals and human beings for maintaining ecological balance, and to educate and motivate all sections of the society toward wildlife, biodiversity, and nature resource conservation, to provide the better facilities to visitors and sensitize the local people about the wild animal. The main basic objective is to maintain the zoo and to provide healthy environments to the zoo animals. Pipli Zoo is located at a very prestigious and important spot on the National Highway number 160 km from New Delhi and about 100 km from Chandigarh in the district. The Pipli Zoo is very beautifully designed and renovated. Lot of religious tourists visit Kurukshetra every year because of its historical and religious importance. Moreover, a large number of local tourists visit the zoo. Our mission is to maintain the zoo and complete the works mentioned. Slide, ma'am. As conservation education is the main objective, we also organize various educational programs to reach out as many people as possible. Such as planting and polythene-free activities, Swachhta Abhiyan organized in the and around the zoo campus. Thanks, ma'am.
ओके, थैंक यू सर। आप काफ़ी जो ब्रीफ प्रेजेंटेशन आपने बनाई है जू के बारे में। सो अभी वील मूव ऑन टू द क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर सेशन फॉर टुडेज टॉक। सो डॉक्टर धनश्री विल टेक क्वेश्चंस फॉर यू फर्स्ट। आप आर यू देयर?
Yes.
All right. So, ma'am, the first question for you is that peafowls are spectacular birds and popular not only nationally but globally, even in zoos abroad. What issues for species conservation do you think that zoos should focus on?
Okay. Um, yeah, these are really magnificent birds, and at least in India, this is their native land. This is the place where they have evolved. So here, actually, population seems to be expanding in many different areas that they were not found earlier. For example, many parts of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, we are seeing many more peafowls than we used to see earlier. Okay. So first of all, we should recognize that it is actually a species of least concern. They are lot in numbers and they seem to be adapting quite well, staying close to human beings. But we shouldn't be under impression that it's all goody goody picture and we don't need to worry about them anymore. We still need to be aware, as I mentioned, the more they come in contact with human beings, even if they are adapting, they seem to be adapting. We need to quite well study how it is affecting their behavior, and not just behavior, by coming in contact with them. Is there any possibility of transmission of diseases? Which is now again this kind of focus has again come into picture because of the COVID situations, that we are becoming more aware. Are there any diseases that are being transferred from humans to wildlife or wildlife to human beings? So that is one of the things that we need to keep a close watch on. uh, we also need to understand that this is a species of almost quite dry lands. Okay. But they do need huge trees, lot of tall trees to roost. And if those are not available, then they may not, the habitat may not be suitable. They also need good water resources around them. So if we can keep intact their habitat as much as possible, which includes tall native trees and good water resources, I think the species will keep doing well.
Right, ma'am. The second question for you, ma'am, is that peafowls have a significant place in our culture. Despite this, the species faces several challenges today. What would your advice be for citizens to engage with the conservation of the species?
Yeah, nice question. I would say that first thing that needs to be done is to be aware what, if we are feeding them, what are we feeding them? Okay, people like to feed birds and other animals too. But please be aware, when you're feeding them, at least try to give food which is closer to their natural food. If we offer them some whatever chips, kurkure, bread, these kind of processed food, it's not going to be good for them. Okay. So that is the first thing we need to be aware of. The second thing we need to be aware of is, always providing them with food is not necessarily a good thing, because if they start depending on the food that is provided by human beings, that may not be good for their health. B, it may lead to aggressive behaviors. So far, I have not experienced any peacock being aggressive to a person providing food, but this can happen. We have definitely seen such things happening with other species. For example, when people feed monkeys lots of food, at certain point when they start depending on human beings for food, they might actually attack, and they're not attacking just viciously, they're just trying to search for food. Okay. uh, so if we are careful and not get into, or rather not get them into the habit of finding food only from human beings, that would help a lot. Okay. Also, the third thing which can help is uh, to be little more tolerant towards wildlife, and leave them at least plant trees which they will find useful either for roosting or for taking shelter. So trying to keep their habitat intact as much as possible.
All right, ma'am. In line with that, the next question is that the Indian peafowl is like you mentioned in the slide that it is close to agricultural fields and it kind of forages on the agricultural crops. So it can be, it's also open to negative perception or maybe persecution as well. So are there any measures on field, like with the local people in place to try to prevent this?
Yeah, so in some places which I kept visiting for my studies, there were huge crop losses. And as I mentioned, they had to sometimes change the crops. So, various farmers can be educated not to use aggressive measures to keep them away. Many a times farmers are very very tolerant. In fact, I should have mentioned this throughout the interviews. Most of the farmers that I introduced, they actually mentioned that madam, unko to khana hi padega, वो भी उनको भी जिंदा रहना है, हमें भी जिंदा रहना है, वो तो आएंगे और खाएंगे ही, तो हम लोग ऐसे ही सोच के लगाते हैं कि उनका कोई हिस्सा थोड़ा वो खा के जा रहे हैं. So this is the tolerance that many farmers inherently have. Okay, but when the crop losses exceed a certain point, at that point they needed to take some measures to prevent or at least reduce those losses. Okay. And simple solutions that can be made to prevent them from coming is, especially during vulnerable stages of crops, if a vigil is kept, if the community is involved, all the farmers in the village are involved, they take turns to keep a watch and making sounds or some non-invasive method, if they try to keep them away, that would be really helpful, and it does happen in many places. Also, some of them put sort of invisible ribbons, but sometimes that can be dangerous for other birds which are flying into the farm. They may get entangled into those ribbons and might die. So keeping those things in mind. Also, many times the insecticides or some kind of treatment is given to the crops. So farmers do take this care. uh, there are few hours after the spraying of insecticide, if any other live animals are kept away from the farm, then there are no chances of poisoning. Okay. We sometimes hear the news of death of a lot of peafowl due to poisoning, and that happens not intentionally in many cases. In many cases they have just spread the insecticide and there is nobody to guard, and the birds come and feed on the crop which is just recently sprayed with insecticide, and that becomes poisonous for them. Okay. So if education of people, that what is harmful for them, when they should be kept away from the crops, community education and keeping a vigil or guarding the crops through community together can be some of the measures that can be taken to save their lives.
All right, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question for you is that does the proximity that the peafowls have to human habitation also influence their breeding behavior? Are there any reports of any threats that they have faced?
Yes, in fact, that is one of the important parts of my study, which unfortunately I couldn't talk here for the lack of time. There are many things that happen when they are around human beings. Their breeding behaviors change to some extent, by which I mean that the places that they choose to dance, they try to keep those places as close to the food as possible. Okay. So what it leads to is, generally around human habitation, if there is lot of garbage, mm, garbage or waste food that is thrown away, mm, they actually start eating on those garbage piles, and that is a really sad sight. I've seen that in some places. Okay. uh, as with other animals, there is a danger of ingesting things that they are not supposed to eat. For example, plastic, or highly processed food, or some toxic things which have gone west, which have been thrown in the garbage. That is one of the things which can harm them. The second thing, around human habitation, there are a lot of stray dogs. Okay. And those stray dogs actually chase, and there are in many places there are at least 6 to 10 deaths of peafowl because of stray dogs chasing and killing them. Okay. So we are trying to collect data on this, that how many deaths actually occur because of stray dogs like this. But stray dogs are typically found around humans, right, where humans stay. So there is danger to them, and we need to take care of that. We need to either keep in check the stray dog population, or if we see such a chase, we need to shoo away the dogs or take care of the dogs somehow. Okay, that is some of the things we can do.
Okay, ma'am. And so the next question for you is that apart from food provisions, are there any other variables that are associated with habitat selection by the Indian peafowl in the wild?
Yes. So as I mentioned, the water sources are very, very important to them. So if there is a water source nearby, they will try to establish a display site, as we call it, the place to dance. They will try to establish it close to the water resources. Shade is a very important resource. So as I mentioned, big trees which not just provide shade but safety from stray dogs or any other invaders or predators, are really important for them. So big trees plus water sources plus food close by are the important things that would influence where they stay.
Okay, ma'am. And coming to the last question, which also brings back the focus on zoos. The question is that what enrichment tools can be used in zoos to encourage natural behavior of the peafowls, which is a large pheasant that's primarily ground and is primarily ground dwelling?
Okay. So I think in zoos, what they typically need is space. Okay. I think I understand that a lot of times space is a huge issue in a zoo when all kinds of animals are housed there. But peafowls, especially if two males are kept together, two adult males, that is very difficult situation, very stressful situation for the peacocks. Peacocks, one peacock with peahens and maybe subadult males can be kept together, but having little more space for them to move around would be a really good enrichment thing. um, Other than that, for peafowl at least, I think there isn't much of a problem. I mean, as long as they get to move around a little bit, especially during breeding season, because in breeding season they establish these specific areas where they consistently dance. Okay, and that area is typically they don't allow any other adult peacock to come even close to that place. Okay, so if there are more than one males, they need to have enough space to establish these dancing areas. Hmm? And that is one of the things that can be definitely done in zoos. So a little more than a small cage would be really good.
All right, ma'am. So with that, we come to the end for the questions for you. We now move on to questions for the zoo. So Rajiv sir, आप हैं हमारे साथ? जी सर, आपके लिए जो पहला सवाल है वो ये है कि एनरिचमेंट एनरिचमेंट और मैनेजमेंट ऑफ पीफाउल के लिए आपके जू में कुछ ऐसा स्पेशल एक्टिविटी होती है?
Yes, ma'am. We doing the enrichments in the peafowl average, like uh, uh, wooden logs and in ropes, use of ropes, and even
सर, आपकी आवाज ब्रेक हो रही है। क्या आप सुन पा रहे हैं मुझे?
small houses like prali for their breeding purpose.
ठीक है सर। सर, आपके लिए जो दूसरा सवाल वो ये है कि आप जू संरक्षण संवेदनशीलता में कैसे भाग लेते हैं? क्या आपकी कोई आउटरीच एक्टिविटीज हैं या एजुकेशन एक्टिविटीज जो आप विजिटर्स के साथ करते हैं?
Yes, ma'am. Uh,
सर, आपकी आवाज ब्रेक हो रही है।
Universities,
राजीव सर, आप सुन पा रहे हैं क्या मुझे? राजीव सर? I think we've lost connection with Mr. Rajiv. We'll just wait for a minute in case we can hear him again or he can rejoin. जी सर, आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही पर।
yes, ma'am.
हाँ, अब आ रही है। तो सर, जो आपका जवाब था उस सवाल का वो हम सुन नहीं पाए थे। अगर आप दोबारा बता दें कि आपके जू में संरक्षण संवेदनशीलता के लिए कौन सी एक्टिविटीज होती है?
हाँ मैम, what is the question, ma'am?
Sir, for conservation awareness, what are the activities? What are the educational activities? कौन सी educational activities करते हैं आप जू में?
Yes, ma'am. Educational activities in which awareness awareness programs with the students like plantation, Swachhta Abhiyan, uh, uh,
अच्छा, तो मतलब आप ऐसे एक्टिविटीज करते हैं on a daily basis with
Education
visitor.
to the school children about the fauna and flora in the nature, which are freely natural, natural fauna and flora in the zoo.
ठीक है
As
सर.
there
और
are natural more than 50 peafowls in the zoo campus. Even
Sir,
they are present in the lawn area.
ठीक है सर. और सर आपके लिए जो लास्ट क्वेश्चन ये है कि जू की भविष्य योजनाएं क्या है, मतलब आपका फ्यूचर प्लान क्या है जू के लिए?
Ma'am, I want to say
देखिए
one thing
मुझे
that
सुन पा रहे हैं? हाँ.
these peafowls are in very large number present in the nature in our zoo, in the lawn area or in the open enclosures of deer. There
सर, जो नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन था आपके लिए वो ये था कि जू की भविष्य योजनाएं क्या है, फ्यूचर प्लान क्या है जू का?
future plan तो मैम जू का have to collect should be in the pair.
ओके. ऑलराइट सर. और आपकी कोई ऐसी योजना है जिससे आप एजुकेशन एक्टिविटीज बढ़ाना चाहते हैं, स्पेशली बर्ड्स को लेके जू में विजिटर्स की तरफ? आपका कोई ऐसा प्लान है, मतलब ऐसे?
वो तो मैम अभी जैसे जैसे हायर अथॉरिटीज हाँ जी
अच्छा.
प्लान करती है.
ओके. ठीक है सर. सो आई थिंक विद दैट हम इस सेशन को समाप्त करते हैं. एंड ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ सीजर डे आई वुड लाइक टू थैंक डॉक्टर धनश्री फॉर टेकिंग टाइम आउट एंड टू मिस्टर राजीव फॉर टेकिंग टाइम out of the schedule and joining us for this talk. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank the audience for being with us throughout. We did face a bit of a lag, I think, during the question answer session. So apologies for that. And I would also like to inform the audience कि अगले हफ्ते Wednesday from 4 to 5 p.m. we will have our 34th Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk on the house sparrow and the Rohtak Zoo. So do tune in for that talk as well. And Mini Zoo Pipli will be continuing their outreach activities. So we will be posting more about them on our social media. So do tune in for that also. So thank you so much. Namaskar.